Since you want to live off of someone, why didn't you come to me? Jaden Garner stared at the red marks on my collarbone, his eyes glinting coldly and dangerously. You have a girlfriend, I said. I turned my face and refused to look at him. Jealousy welled up from the bottom of my heart. Jaden was stunned for a moment. He did not speak for a while. Then he suddenly grabbed my wrist. He laughed in the next second as he uttered my name, Natalie Yates. When he called my name with a smile, his voice was low and magnetic. I had to admit that he had a very nice voice. However, it sounded very harsh to me. What was he laughing at? I tossed him a wary glance and quickly lifted the strap of my dress to cover the red marks. Could it be that he was laughing at me because I spent years in the entertainment industry pretending to be reserved and innocent? Yet I was now running out of the director's room in a disheveled state. Was that why he asked me to live off of him? Before I could react, Jaden held my waist with his broad palms, and then suddenly pulled me toward him. It was as if he wanted to embed me in his arms. Natalie, he whispered to me again and let out a sound that resembled a sigh as he moved his fingertips slowly up my face. I stiffened, feeling hot and uncomfortable. It was too close. I was too close to him. All of a sudden, I caught a whiff of a familiar fragrance of pine and cypress on him. There was also an extremely faint trace of jasmine perfume in the mix. One would not notice it if one did not pay close attention. The perfume belonged to a lady. My pupils suddenly contracted. I knew I should stay away from him, but I felt ashamed and devastated when I realized that I was reluctant to leave him. I could not help scolding myself in my heart. He had a girlfriend, but I liked him. I was too despicable. He suddenly grabbed the back of my neck with his right hand and forced me closer to him. Girlfriend? Do you have terrible eyesight? Huh? He looked down at me as his hot breath tickled my skin, and his low and hoarse voice rang out beside my ear. My breath hitched in my throat. My back tightened as he flirted with me, and my cheeks gradually became red and hot. My face changed slightly after understanding what he meant. My eyesight was great. I could see very clearly. On the contrary, it was he who had bad eyesight. Some memories suddenly appeared in my mind. May 20th, which was exactly a month ago, was such a tender and romantic day. The famous singer, Yell Quinn, happened to release a new album on that day, and Jaden chose to publicize his relationship on that day. What he posted on Twitter was very simple. There were only 2 words, followed by a heart emoticon. It read, "My girl." A picture of a woman was uploaded along with the tweet. The woman in the photo was richly bedecked, for she dressed in a fur coat and wore countless luxury goods on her body. Judging from the picture, she looked to be around 330 pounds, was an older woman, and had a kind appearance. In a short time, Jaden's official love declaration became the top trending topic. Jaden's family situation and his early life were terrible. His parents died young, but fortunately, he became famous at a young age, and his career had been smooth sailing ever since. Jaden looked noble and indifferent. He was both good-looking and had great acting skills. He won many prizes and thrived in the industry for many years without scandals. Suffice it to say, he had a good reputation in the industry. When the romance news broke out, the server was flooded with many comments and retweets, and it almost broke down. It was understandable, especially because the woman looked like a nouveau rich. There were many comments. The hottest comment had more than 500,000 likes. The profile picture was of Borden Milk, and the username read, "Deputy Director of Cutvine Eye Disease Research Center." The comment was short and curt. "Hello." The second comment was liked by more than 400,000 users. It was written by the best actor, Eunice Garcia, who was one of Jaden's few friends in the circle. He commented, "Amazing." The third most liked comment was written by Yell, the famous singer who got his trending topic taken away by Jaden's announcement. It was a curse word. In other comments, countless male fans were crying as they wrote their blessings, and more than half of the female fans could not accept their idol's taste in women, so they announced that they would stop being his fans on the spot. I felt like I was struck by lightning. I was not only his fan, but I also wanted to be his wife. Despite my acting degree, prominent and gorgeous facial features, as well as excellent acting skills, I had not been popular for many years. A year ago, I accidentally collaborated with Jaden on a drama series. I even publicly confessed to him on Twitter because I developed feelings for him when we were acting alongside each other, but he avoided me. After Jaden's official announcement, The netizens burst into a frenzy. Jaden would rather be kept by a rich lady old enough to be his mother than accept my confession. At that moment, I became the laughingstock of the internet. Even the tweet, which I confessed to Jaden a year ago, was found by the netizens and became a top trending topic. People laughed, gloated, and scolded me. Of course, I could not bear it. That day, I flew abroad directly, deleted Twitter, threw away my SIM card, and changed my contact information. After hiding for a whole month, I finally made up my mind to come back. Unexpectedly, Jaden bumped into me running out of the director's room that night. He stopped me and even told me to live off of him. Furthermore, he made fun of my eyesight. Thinking of that, I pressed my palm against his chest and struggled hard to push him away. However, he pinned my hands above my head and firmly imprisoned me in that position. I tried to break free, but my efforts were futile. I glared at him fiercely. My eyesight is perfectly fine. I gritted my teeth and did my best to keep calm, trying not to let the emotions that I should not leak out. Jaden stared at me with his dark and unfathomable eyes. He sighed as if he was a little uncomfortable. He then turned his face and asked in a dull voice, "Do you think I look like someone who has a girlfriend?" The atmosphere was still for a moment. I trembled and could not believe it. I did not expect an elegant and aloof man like Jaden to say such shameless words. Did he think that I was a fool or an outdated person who did not surf the internet? I trembled with anger and pushed him away as I questioned, "Do you think that I'm stupid?" Unexpectedly, Jaden glanced at me with eyes full of emotion. His lips were slightly parted, but he didn't say a thing. I let out a bark of laughter out of anger and curled the corner of my lips into a smirk. At that moment, the aura I was exuding was almost glacial. I steadied my breathing and looked up at him after a while. He was looking back at me with a dark look in his eyes. After staring at him for a long time, I suddenly smiled and said, "Do you really want to let me live off you?" He frowned and said nothing. I looked at him with irony in my eyes. He did not even want me when I went up to him before. Now that I came out of the director's room, he suddenly felt that I was precious. "I want you," he said in a low voice. I sneered in my heart and leaned toward him. I wrapped my arms around his neck and pressed my warm lips against his ears. "If you really want to be my sponsor, I have one condition in addition to giving me the resources I deserve." His breathing suddenly became rapid. "What's the condition?" I smiled, splayed my fingers on his warm chest, and rubbed his chest gently. I held in my laughter as my eyes gleamed. His eyes, on the other hand, were gloomy and full of lust. The next second, he picked me up and brought me from the corridor to his room. I fell into a soft bed. He leaned down, and his thin lips fell on the red marks on my collarbone. He bit me harshly as if he wanted to erase the marks left by others earlier. I trembled and raised my chin slightly. When he kissed all the way along the collarbone, I, too, kissed him naturally. My words overflowed between our lips and teeth. "I want money." Without an ounce of hesitation, he said in a low voice. "Okay." I pushed him away slightly, gasped for a while, looked up at him, and smiled casually. "I want $312,000, and I want it today." He still promised me and kissed me again. "Okay." My eyes were filled with tears. "Somehow," I suddenly said without thinking, "I want you to break up with that old baby of yours." He stopped and looked a little confused. Old before he could finish, I kissed him again and gritted my teeth. Forget it. I really did not want to hear his girlfriend's name from his mouth. That night, I held his shoulders harshly. My heart felt like it was soaked in acid, and the feeling almost devoured me. We did not sleep until we were completely exhausted. The music was noisy, and the lights were dim. I saw the rich woman who might weigh 330 pounds sitting lazily on the couch in the room. Jaden stood beside her. The woman took a puff of smoke from the cigar in her hand and smiled at Jaden. "Babe, come on, sit on my lap." Jaden was stunned, hesitant, and unable to move. The woman's smile froze. After a while, she narrowed her eyes and questioned him. "Then, should I leave?" Jaden's pupils suddenly shrank. He frowned and finally made up his mind. As soon as he took a step toward her, I rushed over and dragged him away. "No, don't go over there." Jaden was shocked and looked at me in disbelief. "And Natalie, what are you doing here?" I stared at his face, and the jealousy in my heart suddenly intensified as I chided him sadly. "Do you know she's old enough to be your mother?" When he heard this, Jaden's face paled, and his eyes turned red. His expression made my heart ache. I clutched his arm tightly and could not help crying hysterically. "Why did you choose her? Am I not good enough for you?" After I said that, the room was enveloped by pin-drop silence. Jaden glanced at the woman subconsciously. She was graceful and rich, and the faint blue light cast a glow on her luxurious fur coat. He withdrew his gaze and pursed his lips. After a long time, he closed his eyes and parted his lips, saying, "I'm sorry." I felt suffocated, and I kept shaking my head. I watched him tear my hands away bit by bit, and there was a deep and dark emotion in his eyes. "She's giving me too much." "No!" I jolted awake from my dream and opened my eyes. It was the next morning, and the morning light was seeping through the window. I was sore and weak all over, and I had some unspeakable pain somewhere. A warm breath fell on my neck. I turned my head stiffly and saw Jaden's beautiful face. He smiled. Evidently, he had slept soundly and had a completely different experience from me, who had a nightmare. I stared at him expressionlessly for a while, then stretched out my hand to touch his forehead. I slid my hand down the contour of his face, past his closed eyes and straight nose bridge. My hand finally stopped on his thin lips. My eyes darkened, and my heart hurt badly. Did his girlfriend ever touch him there? Suddenly, an arm was wrapped around my waist, pulling me toward Jaden. I was completely caught off guard and ended up snuggling into his broad chest. "Natalie," he whispered and placed his jaw above my head. My body suddenly stiffened. He buried his head and rubbed his lips against my neck. His hot lips and breath touched my skin, and it made me feel a little itchy. I hesitated for a moment and raised my head slightly. It was then I noticed that his eyes were still closed, and he was sleeping soundly. My heart skipped a beat. "So," he subconsciously uttered my name. Did that mean he actually liked me as much as I liked him? A buzz sounded, which startled me. I was pulled back to reality in an instant. Turning my head, I saw the phone beside my pillow light up. My phone number was just obtained yesterday when I returned home, and there was only one contact in it for the time being. Could it be? My breathing became tense as I carefully moved the big hand on my waist and reached out to get the phone. I unlocked the phone and clicked on the notification. It was a very concise text message. It read, "You should come to the audition that's happening a week from now." I was stunned. My fingertips trembled slightly, and an unrestrained joy spread all over my body. Every cell of my body was trembling with excitement. Who sent the text message? Why are you so happy? A magnetic low and hoarse voice sounded in my ear. I smiled brightly, touched the words on the screen with my fingers again, and answered without paying much attention. "Mr. Campbell." Surprise came over me only after I uttered my reply. Jaden had woken up. In an instant, I felt the air above my head become heavy. Suddenly, something occurred to me, and I blinked. Yesterday, I ran out of Quade Campbell's room and bumped into Jaden. I turned my head stiffly. Before I could see the expression of Jaden next to me, he held my waist and pulled me into his arms. Then, Jaden leaned over. His breath invaded my pores, and it made my body tremble slightly. He looked down at me, and I looked at him too, my breath hastening. Jaden's eyes were very beautiful. They appeared cold and emotionless, but presently, a gloomy look could be seen in his eyes, as if his mood was somewhat bad. I stared at him and got distracted again. In a trance, I remembered the day I first met Jaden a year ago. I was shooting an urban drama series and was acting as the second female lead, who was a vicious character. All those years, Jaden and I had never met each other, nor crossed paths with one another. On that day, the actor acting opposite me left temporarily as he had something urgent to attend to. The main character, Eunice, saw Jaden in the neighborhood and got him to join the film crew to save the scene. That was the first time we acted together. Moreover, it was a scene in the bathroom. I vaguely remembered that the lighting was dim and romantic that night. The warm water washed down from the top of my head, and I was enveloped in fog. The reserved and elegant man suddenly raised his hand, slowly unbuttoned a button on his shirt, then leaned over to me and closed the distance between us. He stared at me then like he was staring at me presently. "Ouch!" I hissed. There was a sharp pain on the corner of my lips. I took a deep breath and instinctively glared at him as I muttered, "Jaden, are you a dog?" Jaden pressed his forehead against mine and licked his lips. "What were you thinking about just now?" Something flashed in my mind. My heart pounded crazily. But I forced myself to calm down and looked at him provocatively. "I'm thinking about you." He stared at me and swallowed hard. "But do you believe it?" I smiled slyly with a charming look in my eyes. He frowned as a storm brewed in his gaze. He tilted his head slightly, and his lips brushed over my face and pressed against my ear. "Natalie, if I hadn't called Mr. Campbell last night and said that I was already at the door, would you two have continued what you were doing?" I was a little surprised. "Quaid did receive a call last night, after hanging up the phone." He smiled meaningfully and said, "Someone is jealous. You'd better go back first." It turned out that Jaden was the one who made the call. Wait, so he did it on purpose? Jaden was a little away from me, and his cold hand was on my collarbone. The red marks had not yet disappeared, and he suddenly pressed down on them. "Where else did he touch you besides here?" His tone was ice cold. My heart skipped a beat. Annoyance and gloominess churned in my heart, and I could not breathe smoothly. In his heart, was I really the kind of woman who did whatever she could to become popular? Did I ever do those things when I got along with him this year? Was he blind? Couldn't he see it? However, in a moment, I came to an understanding. Jaden had always been cold to me, and everything about me had nothing to do with him. So naturally, he would not pay attention to it. I could not help but lower my head, and there was a feeling of sadness in my heart. Suddenly, he held my face, and his fingers habitually rolled over. His eyes were dark. "Natalie, answer my question." I tried my best to control myself. I raised my chin, curled my red lips into a grin, and said coldly, "Why don't you take a guess?" He breathed heavily. "Natalie, for the sake of resources, you really..." He paused. His lips moved, and the line of his lips tightened, but he did not say anything more. "What about you?" However, I would not let him go. "Aren't you the same as me?" I sniffed, and some inexplicable feeling of grievance welled up in me. I blurted out impulsively, "We both use our bodies to get what we want. Are you any better than me?" Jaden was stunned by my roar. He was confused at first, but his eyes were gradually clouded over by complexity and gloom. I stared at the change of expression on his face, and my heart seemed to tighten with unease. He finally spoke in a helpless tone. "Natalie, my relationship with Mr. Reyes is not what you think." I was stunned. "Mr. Reyes? Simon Reyes?" I was shocked, and the image of a middle-aged man with a balding head and a big belly immediately appeared in my mind. I forgot to mention something. Jaden's first film was shot by Simon. Simon was an internationally renowned director, and Jaden won the Best Actor award that year with his superb acting skills. Thus, Jaden became a leading actor whom Simon employed regularly and became famous ever since. Jaden's voice continued in my ear. "Although I have been acting in Mr. Reyes' work for several years, we are in a legitimate partnership. He is my respected elder. There is no discord between us." I suddenly realized that he thought that I was talking about him serving director Simon. I stared at his dark and deep eyes and enunciated, "You know I'm not talking about Mr. Reyes." Jaden was stunned for a second and seemed to understand something. He looked at me and spoke with a deep and melancholic tone. "Natalie, I have nothing to do with Eunice as you thought." "That's enough," I shouted, my voice trembling slightly. At that moment, it felt as if my throat was blocked. I knew that Jaden was playing dumb. Simon, the director who propelled him to fame, and Eunice, a good friend of his in the industry for many years, had been mentioned by him as shields, yet he did not mention his rich girlfriend. Was it because he was guilty? Well, what other reason could there be? The next second, I pushed him away, quickly turned over, got out of bed, and ran to the door. Before I touched the doorknob, Jaden hugged me from behind. He grabbed my wrist and pressed me against the wall by the door. I took a deep breath and yelled, "Jaden!" Jaden leaned over, and I could feel his hot and damp breath on my ear. "Are you going to go out like this?" My eyelids twitched. As the bright light shone on me, I realized that I was only wearing a silk spaghetti strap nightgown. Because of the tugging earlier, the shoulder strap slipped off one side, and a large mottled mark appeared with the fluctuation of my chest. If I bumped into the paparazzi in this state, I would become the top trending topic. Perhaps I would even fail the audition that was set to happen a week later. My eyes darkened, and I was a little frustrated. I glared at him, then roughly stretched out my hand to hook the strap. Just as I was about to pull the strap up, my fingers were wrapped by a big hand. My pupils narrowed, for I was startled. What was he trying to do? While I was in a daze, Jaden's thin and defined hand held me, then gently lifted my fingers and brought the strap back to its original position. He moved very gently as if he was afraid of hurting me. If you use as much strength as you did just now, this nightgown will also be damaged like the dress you were wearing last night. Hearing that, I gritted my teeth with hatred. Was he not the one who damaged the red dress I wore last night? Certainly. He would know exactly how it was damaged. Jaden rubbed the skin on my shoulder with his fingers. His voice was so low and raspy, I could not read his emotions at all. If you really don't want to stay with me, I'll ask my assistant to bring you a clean set of clothes. It won't take much time. You can leave after that. He put his arms around my waist and burrowed his face into my shoulder. Natalie, just stay with me for half an hour. As I took in the pleasant fragrance on his body, for some reason, I became misty-eyed. What on earth was wrong with me? Why did I seduce him even though I knew he had a girlfriend? Why did I get myself into such a situation? Half an hour later, Jaden's assistant arrived. He was a young man in his 20s, with slightly curled hair and a bright smile. He was not surprised to see me, and he said sweetly, "Natalie, I've brought the clothes over." My face was slightly hot. I took the clothes stiffly and suddenly felt that something was wrong. I turned my head and asked Jaden, "Where's Caleb? Did you change your assistant?" Jaden lifted his eyes and nodded placidly, humming a nonchalant response as he did so. On the other hand, a strange look flitted across his assistant's face when he heard the name. "Caleb, Natalie. You know that Caleb's." He paused in the middle of his sentence and scratched his head. A worried look crossed his visage. It was as if there was something he could not say. I frowned slightly. I did not know Caleb Zenos very well. All I remembered was that he had fair skin, big eyes, and an above-average appearance. As a normal person, he looked better than many celebrities in the industry. Jaden had always taken good care of Caleb, so why did he suddenly change his assistant? I opened my mouth and was about to ask when Jaden's phone rang. Jaden looked at the name on the screen and hung up. A few seconds later, the phone rang again. This time, Jaden frowned. I stole a glance at his phone screen and saw the name, Shiana Sanchez. My vision paused on the screen. Shiana Sanchez. Obviously, that was a woman's name. Could she be his girlfriend? My body stiffened again. Answer it. Maybe there's something important. After the phone rang several times, I urged him to answer it as if I was not bothered, but my face gradually turned pale. Jaden froze for a moment. He looked at me with his deep eyes and said, "Okay." I looked down. After a while, I saw Jaden answering the call. The room was very quiet, and a delicate and whimpering female voice rang out. I could hear her crystal clear. "Jaden, you finally answered my call." "Jaden," she addressed him intimately. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. When I came back to my senses, I noticed Jaden's dark and unfathomable gaze. It turned out that he had finished making the phone call. Jaden looked at me apologetically. "Natalie, I'm sorry. There might be something I have to deal with later." In other words, he was driving me away. My heart trembled. Although I intended to leave, I still felt a chill in my heart when I heard Jaden utter the words to drive me away. "I'll take my leave right away." I quickly wiped the corners of my eyes and turned around to leave, but Jaden's voice came from behind. "Wait!" I sniffled and grinned. I knew he was reluctant to let me leave. Then, Jaden's cold and steady voice traveled through the air and into my ears. "Have a safe trip, Natalie." My smile froze. Jaden seemed to realize something was amiss, so he quickly explained, be careful on the road. Take care, don't be caught by the paparazzi." And he paused for a moment as if he was thinking about his words before continuing. "After returning home, remember to prepare for the audition for Mr. Campbell's new series a week later." I was completely stunned. I turned my head and looked at him in disbelief. I could not figure out what he was thinking. He was obviously jealous when he asked about what Quaid and I did last night. But now he was pretending to be classy and asked me to prepare for his rival's audition. What a hypocrite he was. At that thought, an idea suddenly popped up in my mind. The colors began to drain from my face as I pursed my lips. Could it be that after Jaden finished making that call, he suddenly woke up and decided to get rid of me and devote himself to his girlfriend? Perhaps he wanted to take advantage of the audition and send me to Quaid? Jaden sent me out and arranged for his assistant to drive me home. Sitting in the back seat of the car, My body stiffened suddenly. There was a faint smell of jasmine in the car. It smelled exactly the same as the scent on Jaden last night. 5 back in my apartment. I did not contact my assistant or agent immediately. It was useless to contact them. My agent had several artists who had full schedules and did not have time to care about me. As for my assistant, I did not have any friends in the circle. Only my assistant had a good relationship with me. However, long before I went abroad, I heard that her parents were ill, so I gave her a long holiday. Thus, I had to do everything by myself, including sourcing resources, image maintenance, arranging for food, clothing, housing, transportation, and other daily matters. It took me a week to memorize the lines of the whole script, and I carefully studied the characters over and over again to seize the hard-earned opportunity. It could be said that I was determined to get the role of the heroine in Bewitching Concubine. I devoted myself to the script and was so busy that I did not even have time to eat. But then I realized something. Jaden did not contact me throughout the entire week. It seemed like he was really going to cut ties with me completely. The night before the audition, I stayed up all night reading the script. When it was almost dawn, I lay on the couch and took a quick nap. In a daze, I had another dream. I vaguely recall having dreamt about what happened to Jaden, Eunice, and me while we were in the same film crew a year ago. In my dream, I was lying on the chair as I read the script. Seeing that Jaden had come to save the day, I was so shocked that my hand trembled and the script fell to the ground with a thud. I hurriedly squatted down to pick up the script. At that moment, a slender and pale hand suddenly appeared in front of me and picked the script up first. I seemed to have felt a cold sensation brushing past my fingertips. My body stiffened slightly, and I raised my eyes. Jaden was dressed in a white shirt and black trousers. He had wide shoulders and a narrow waist. With a single glance, I could tell that he had an excellent figure. However, the neckline of the shirt was tightly buttoned. He had a cold expression plastered on his visage. While his gaze appeared cold and reserved, there was a seductive but restrained air about him. He was looking at me with those deep and dark eyes of his. "I thought you wouldn't come." Eunice came over and tossed us a meaningful glance. Jaden held the script in one hand, while his other hand was in his pocket. He glanced at Eunice lazily and said nothing. Unbothered, Eunice turned to look at me. "This is Natalie, who I told you about before." Then, he raised his eyebrows at Jaden and questioned the latter. "Well, I'm right, aren't I? Natalie is even more beautiful in real life." My heart skipped a beat, and I subconsciously wanted to see the expression on Jaden's face. Unfortunately, Jaden was expressionless. He ignored Eunice's words and slowly swept his gaze across the script. Then, he handed it to me. His tone was indifferent when he uttered, "I've seen your acting in monochrome. It's great. Compared to drama series, you are more suitable to act in movies." My heart skipped a beat. Monochrome was my first and only movie. I played a blind girl who was trapped in darkness and mire but tried to pursue the light. It was a tense literary film with little popularity. I did not expect Jaden to have seen it. I was inexplicably emotional. I lowered my eyelids, took the script from him, and said in a low voice, "Thank you." When I first asked him to come, this guy hung up the phone before I finished speaking. Eunice's eyes darted between us. His gaze was meaningful, and it seemed like he was determined to matchmake us to the end. Later, I sent him a message on WhatsApp, saying that you'd be acting opposite him. Guess what, Natalie? He came in less than 10 minutes. Hearing this, I looked up at Jaden. Natalie. Jaden's face was still devoid of emotions. He merely gave Eunice a warning look before fixing his gaze on me. "Please don't have the wrong idea." I lowered my eyes, my lips moving slightly. "Okay, I won't." Jaden seemed to be at a loss for words. He looked at me and then turned to Eunice, who was watching us. He switched the topic. "Mr. Reyes is having a birthday party next Wednesday. Come with me." Eunice came back to his senses from watching the dramatic scene unfold in front of him. His expression became slightly stiff, and he refused. "I'm not going." I looked at Eunice and instantly came to a realization. Eunice used to be the leading actor for the internationally acclaimed director, Simon. His acting came naturally to him, and because of that, he won many awards. However, Eunice had a strange hobby. Every time he got the Best Actor award, he would reward himself by playing a bossy CEO in a drama series. Simon was so angry as he thought that Eunice did not cherish his opportunities. If it went on, Eunice would gradually lose his appeal. However, Eunice was also stubborn. He did not want to listen to Simon and wanted to do things his own way. In the end, the two went their separate ways unhappily and refused to greet one another when they bumped into each other. Jaden raised his eyebrows. Just as he was about to say something, Eunice interrupted him. Wait a minute. Eunice frowned. You promised to do this not because of Natalie, but because you want me to go to Simon's party. Am I right? I was stunned. Jaden glanced at him and said, "You're not too stupid." It turned out that I had misunderstood him earlier. When I woke up, I was in a daze and spacing out while hugging a pillow. It seemed that even my dreams were implying something to me. Whether it was a year ago or now, it seemed that it was me who had misunderstood. 7. Seeing that Jaden was also one of the judges, I bit my lower lip slightly. There was no change in my expression, but my heart skipped a beat. There were only 3 judges in total. One was a former colleague who gave me preferential treatment, and the other was a current lover who had slept with me several times. There was only one person left with little power to reject me. It seemed that Roxanne was right. I would succeed in the audition steadily. Damn it. I was being pretentious. After the staff left, there was only the sound of 3 people breathing in the audition hall. Quaid glanced at Jaden and then looked at me with ambiguous eyes as he smiled. Natalie, we were just talking about your past. I frowned and looked at him in surprise. It almost occurred to me that Jaden looked unhappy just now. Was it because of what Quaid said? Quaid stared at me for a few seconds and suddenly raised his eyebrows. Why are you so nervous? I just talked with Jaden about the interesting things that happened while filming Monochrome and exchanged our thoughts. I didn't expect that he and I had many ideas about the movie, which were very co-productive, and he paused and looked at me with deep eyes. Suddenly, he lowered his eyes and laughed in a low voice. Our taste is the same. Even a fool could recognize what he meant. I bit my lips and did not understand what Quaid wanted to do. He did pursue me after he stopped filming Monochrome 5 years ago. Later, I saw him flirting with other women at the same time, but he looked indifferent. He calmly put on his clothes and did not even look at me. I've always been playing with you. So, what was going on presently? At that time, Jaden, who had been silent for a long time, suddenly said, Natalie, I won't do that to you. I suddenly looked at him, and my heart suddenly skipped a beat. I seemed to understand what he said, but I did not seem to understand what he meant completely. Suddenly, I remembered something. That day, I opened the door of the hotel. Quaid indifferently said that he was just playing with me. After that, the paparazzi and reporters followed closely behind him and squeezed in. That day, Twitter was exploding with the news. The famous singer Yell cursed and announced that his new album launch event would be postponed. At that time, Quaid was already a genius director in everyone's eyes, and I was just an ordinary and transparent person. The marketing accounts had written a lot about him and the woman, but my name was not even written in it. The whole time, I was written as an unknown actress. When I came back to my senses from the anger, I suddenly realized a problem. What did Jaden mean? I could not breathe, and my eyes were fixed on Jaden. In an instant, an almost impossible guess came out of my heart. Has he been paying attention to me since then? It did not seem impossible. After all, he had seen my part in Monochrome. Natalie, I'm not like him, Jaden repeated. His tone was as cold as his aura. It was as frosty as ice that could not be melted. But at the same time, there was some other meaning. I blinked and looked at him with my heart beating very fast. He looked at me. His eyes gradually turned from indifference to gentleness, and his thin lips opened lightly. He was sincere and confident. He's a jerk. I'm not. As soon as Jaden finished his words, a woman's laughter suddenly came from the door. Oh, has the audition started? Why didn't you to wait for me? I looked back subconsciously, and then my pupils shrank slightly. The woman looked in her early 50s. She was bloated, dressed with jewelry, and had delicate and shiny skin which was well maintained. She looked exactly the same as the lady in Jaden's picture. My face turned pale, and my fingertips were cold. I did not expect that the third judge would be Jaden's girlfriend. When the woman saw me, she suddenly said, "T.S." She twisted her waist and walked over, looking at me from head to toe, and then smiled at Jaden and Quaid. This face alone can afford the title of bewitching concubine. I hurriedly lowered my head, and my heart trembled. What's more, I was embarrassed. Quaid laughed. Yes. When I first met Natalie, Jaden interrupted him and said in a cold voice, Natalie, which scene are you going to show us? I came to my senses like I had just woken up from a dream and looked up at Jaden. My thoughts were a mess. I did not understand why he could be so calm in such a terrible situation. Besides, he knew that the woman was also one of the judges. Why did he not remind me earlier and let me prepare well? I frowned. Something flashed through my mind, but it flashed by too fast that I did not know what it was. I suppressed the anxiety in my chest, took a deep breath, and tried to keep as calm as I could. I'm going to try out with the 7th scene. Jaden's girlfriend glanced at the script, pondered, and raised her eyebrows at Jaden. This is a famous scene in this movie. Why don't you act with her? Jaden, my pupils narrowed. The scene was technically intimate, but she, looking at her lazy and indifferent eyes, I bit my lips and felt ashamed. Sure enough, one could not judge a book by its cover. Perhaps only such a free and generous woman could make Jaden, who was indifferent and abstinent, crazy in love and officially publicize their relationship. I looked up at Jaden and saw that he was obviously stunned. Then he smiled at Suzette and said, okay. As he withdrew his gaze, the emotion in his eyes faded. 6. It was 10 in the morning. On the 4th floor of the Splendor Studio, the auditions for the roles in Mr. Campbell's new film, Bewitching Concubine, were being held. Quaid Campbell, he was only 25 years old, and he was the youngest genius director in the circle. He had a unique style and was recalcitrant. In the past 5 years, he had only made 2 films. The first film was unpopular, and it was not well received. In the same year, with his second film, he swept up all of the major international awards and became famous. After finishing his second film, he suddenly went abroad to study and did not return home until recently. Now that he was making a big comeback, he could be said to be the most popular person in the eyes of the actors. I glanced over and found that the huge lounge was almost full of people, except for a few newcomers. Most of them were first-tier and second-tier actresses with popularity. It could be called the gathering of stars. While waiting, I suddenly heard 2 actresses whispering together. Have you heard that this role has already been determined? Now it's just a process. I paused and looked away from the script. I looked up at them. The actress who was talking was called Roxanne. She looked pure and sweet, and her resources were also good. She was not good at acting, so her shows all flopped. The other actress was a little surprised and leaned toward her. What? Who is it? Before Roxanne could say anything, she seemed to think of something. Could it be Shiana? She became famous overnight because of the advertisement she acted in with Jaden. My eyes widened in shock, and my brain stopped working instantly. Was Jaden's old baby also in the entertainment industry? Roxanne shook her head. It's not her. The other actress obviously did not believe it. Shiana appeared out of the blue a month ago. Her first gig was to cooperate with Jaden. She became popular after 1 month of her debut, but there was no further capital to help her. Who will believe it? I heard that Jaden was her college senior, and they had a close personal relationship. Who else can it be but her? The more I overheard their conversation, the stranger I felt. Was Jaden Shiana's college senior? I frowned. I was more certain that Shiana was not Jaden's old baby. Who was Shiana? Roxanne pursed her lips and spoke after a long while. No matter how good Shiana's resources are, she can't be better than that someone who can read the script. Another actress was surprised. Someone? Reading the script? What information did you get? I stared at Roxanne with a bad feeling in my heart. Roxanne smiled, and a dark light flashed in her eyes. Someone has been entangled with Jaden for a whole year. I thought she was in love with him. Just a week ago, the paparazzi caught her coming out of Mr. Campbell's room in a mess. If someone hadn't immediately suppressed the news, it would have become a piece of explosive news. The other actress's eyes widened suddenly. She did not understand. So you mean Natalie? A loud voice sounded at the door. The 2 people suddenly froze, looked at each other, and looked back at me in a daze. Their originally beautiful faces suddenly lost color. When the uniformed staff saw me, they immediately waved to me. It's your turn. I stood up and walked out slowly. When I passed by them, I paused slightly and smiled casually. If your acting skills were half as good as your gossiping skills, you would have won all the awards. After saying that, I walked straight to the door regardless of Roxanne's ugly expression. Bewitching Concubine was written by Suzette. a great scriptwriter for Splendor Corp. It took years for her to polish the script alone, and she deliberately invited Quaid to shoot it. It could be said that she wrote it to win an award. I came back for it a month ago, when I was relaxing abroad. I happened to meet Quaid. He was wearing a black trench coat with his hands in his trouser pockets, and his eyebrows were both familiar and strange. At first, he seemed a little surprised to see me, but a moment later, he smiled, and his brown eyes were glistening. "Natalie, I've been preparing for a movie recently. I'm picking the heroine. Do you want to read the script?" I narrowed my eyes at him, seeing that I did not speak. He looked at me more intensely, but the smile on his lips became more and more casual, and he approached me. "Don't think that I'm giving you preferential treatment. After reading the script, even if you are really interested in acting, you have to pass my preliminary test first, and then go to the company to participate in the audition." I smiled carelessly, but the smile did not reach my eyes. "Why do you think I can still act in your movie?" "Yes." Why would he think that I would fail by working with the same person again? "Oh, I forgot to mention that my first film Monochrome was directed by Quaid." He smiled and hummed, "Are you still angry with me?" I gave him a big eye roll, accompanied by a curse word, and turned my head and left. However, in the end, I returned back to the country with Quaid. After reading the script, I only had one sentence in my mind. "Ah, this is really interesting." As for that night, when Jaden found me coming out of Quaid's room, we were really practicing for the show. Rather, it was a test given to me by the Quaid. The red marks on my collarbone, which Jaden minded a lot, were all made by me in order to better integrate into the character. I pinched myself viciously and endured despite the pain. "We're here." The staff's curt and concise words pulled me back to reality. I calmed down, thanked him politely, and then looked up at the judge's seat. There were 3 soft chairs in total. Sitting in the middle was Quaid. He crossed his legs and looked sideways, with some interest in his eyes. The seat on his right was empty. It seemed that someone was not there because they had something on, but their clothes were still on it. It was a gorgeous fur coat that looked somewhat familiar. On his left side, it was so surprising. Jaden was sitting next to him as he stared at me expressionlessly. The most troublesome thing about costume drama was makeup. Sometimes it would take a long time just to set the hairstyle alone. However, it was just an audition, so I only changed into a film costume. My makeup was still the light makeup I did before I came, and I just reapplied lipstick. I opened the dressing room door and did not expect Jaden to wait for me at the entrance. He had changed into a dark red robe with black embroidery on his cuffs. His expression was solemn and dignified. At that moment, I thought I had really seen the third prince from the movie Bewitching Concubine. When Jaden saw me, darkness slowly appeared in his eyes. His Adam's apple seemed to move a little. "You look gorgeous." I pursed my lips tightly and said nothing. He stretched out his hand and seemed to want to touch my face. I suddenly backed away, and then under his flabbergasted gaze, I closed the dressing room door. Bang! As expected, there was a rhythmic knock on the door outside. Jaden's knock on the door was also very characteristic. It was steady and sturdy, with a moderate rhythm, like the swinging sound of a pendulum clock. I lifted my head, took a deep breath, and said sullenly, "Stop knocking. I won't come out even if you knock until your fingers are injured." There was silence outside, as if he was thinking, but soon he began to knock on the door again. However, his movements were much lighter. My frustration instantly overwhelmed me, and my voice was a little furious. "Can you please leave first? I'll go out after you leave." As soon as I finished speaking, the atmosphere was so quiet that it seemed as if the air was still. The sound of breathing was audible. After a while, Jaden said, "Although this scene is about the female lead cheating on the emperor with the third prince, the female lead has experienced too many betrayals and bloodshed, so now she has gone into a state of extreme nervousness. In short, crazy is the word to describe her." The person who auditioned for this scene just now only showed the charm of the female lead when she deliberately seduced the third prince, but did not illustrate her madness. Later, "You just need to." He suddenly paused and smiled. "What am I worrying about? You've always been good at acting. I should trust you." His voice was a little blurry through the door, but it sounded sincere. However, it sounded particularly harsh to me. I felt like I was seriously ill. I would rather Jaden scold me, be disgusted with me, and blame me for the guilt of that night's wild downfall, then nonchalantly teach me acting techniques as if we did not do something that hurt her girlfriend. Plus, it seemed he wanted to maintain a romantic relationship with me for the long term. I clenched my fingers, and Suzette's face suddenly appeared in my mind beyond my control. My heart tightened. I suddenly felt that the whole situation was meaningless. Jaden, I regret it. I shouldn't have been obsessed with you. Just pretend I didn't ask you to keep me as a mistress that night. We're both adults and should know how to stop while we're still ahead. Natalie, I said firmly, after today, don't contact me privately except for the necessary official business. I lowered my eyes and uttered the words clearly, but suddenly felt exhausted. From now on, we mind our own business. Before I could finish my words, the door was unlocked with a click. The next second, Jaden's tall and well-built body squeezed in instantly. The area before my eyes suddenly darkened. Before I could react, he grabbed my wrist and pulled me into his arms. I don't agree. I heard Jaden's hoarse voice, unfriendly as usual, but now his breath was a little unstable. He cupped one side of my face with one hand and forced me to look up. That extremely unemotional face gradually appeared in my sight. I became enraged and was so furious that I cursed. It's none of my business whether you agree or not. His gaze immediately turned icy like a blizzard. He said word by word, Natalie, you provoked me first. When I was halfway through swearing, his impactful statement forced me to stop talking. He maintained his position and looked at me quietly with his sharp eyes. He suddenly asked, do you remember how you confessed your love to me on Twitter a year ago? My eyelashes trembled, and I bit my lips while looking at him. He stared at me with darkness in his eyes. With punctuation, you said 15 words in total. My heart was pounding with some inexplicable emotions building up inside me. I closed my eyes and shouted, I don't remember. Sooner or later, Jaden will belong to me. My out-of-control voice and Jaden's calm voice sounded at the same time. I looked up at him, and my face was totally flushed, and some fragmented memories flashed through my mind. In fact, the confession of love to Jaden I posted on Twitter a year ago was an accident. We were working in the same industry. If I really confessed my love openly to a top star on Twitter, others would inevitably suspect I wanted to create hype. Not to mention, the film I acted in with Jaden was in the promotional period. That move definitely gave haters a chance to attack me online. The truth was, I was drunk. I was never a fan of alcohol, but that day was Jaden's rap party, and I could not help making an exception. He only stayed with the film crew for 10 days, but I could not help falling in love with him within those short 10 days. I got drunk that night. When I got home, I shakily took out my phone, logged into my main account, and boldly posted on Twitter, sooner or later, Jaden will belong to me. But, perhaps at that time, Jaden also thought that I deliberately acted as a couple with him for popularity, putting on a show to tell people that we fell in love during filming, and setting an affectionate persona for myself. In his mind, the whole incident was staged by me. Otherwise, there was no other way to explain what happened later. During Jaden's 10 days with the film crew, we got along very well and often discussed the script together. When we had different opinions, he would listen to me calmly and then remain cool-headed when analyzing how the scene should be played out. When we thought the same, he would look at me calmly with a faint smile, portraying the unique elegance of an ink painting. His face was as perfect as jade, and he was a natural beauty. He clearly treated me differently at the beginning. After the confession, I nervously went to him and wanted to go with the flow and confess my feelings to him in person. However, he ignored me and gave me an excuse to leave before I could say anything. He acted as if I was a stranger. The following year was no different. He was even colder, which made me try my best to pursue him. Yet, he never even looked at me from the beginning to the end. A strand of my hair scattered, and Jaden naturally raised his hand to hook it behind my ear. His action made me regain my thoughts. Jaden looked askance at me. You even mentioned me after you confessed your love to me on Twitter that day. He paused and laughed faintly. 3 times. He looked at me as if he had other thoughts. As if you were afraid that I wouldn't see it. I retorted, it's all over. My ears were so red that they could bleed any time. I was really drunk at that time. When I realized what I had done, I planned to delete the tweet to destroy the evidence. My mushy brain made me look at Twitter repeatedly, thinking that the message could be deleted by posting it 3 times. Jaden smiled slightly and wanted to say something more. Suddenly, there were 2 heavy knocks on the door. Shortly afterward, a very unfriendly voice sounded. "Are you guys going to join the audition?" I was stunned. It was Quaid. 9 Jaden. Quaid. And I walked in silence. Quaid asked me inadvertently, "Natalie, what were both of you doing in the dressing room?" I lowered my head and answered without hesitation, "We were changing clothes." After saying that, I snapped back to my senses. When I looked up, I caught sight of Quaid's darkened expression. I could not explain myself any further. Ever since I found Quaid sleeping with another woman 5 years ago, no matter what I had thought about him in the past, I knew it would be impossible for us to be together. Now, he was only my film director. That was it. Seeing that I did not say anything, Quaid looked intently at me. Jaden was in a good mood. He smiled and said, "Of course. You change your clothes in the dressing room. Some things can only be done at home." Quaid looked even grimmer. Back in the studio, the 3 of us had different expressions. Only Suzette got excited when she saw me and Jaden all dressed up. "You look like the hero and heroine from the book." Quaid's breathing got heavier. He cast a glance at Jaden and me. "Natalie, you can begin." The lights around us suddenly dimmed. Bewitching Concubine was the story of Wenna, who lived a very short life. Wenna was a first-rank female official in the royal court. During the years of the Reformation, her family was framed, their assets were confiscated, and the entire family was sentenced to death for treason. However, Wenna managed to escape. In order to find out the truth, Wenna became a concubine of the king. She quickly rose among the ranks of her fellow concubines because of her good looks. The 7th scene of the film was with Wenna's former fellow official in the court. The 3rd prince, Yahir, was beginning to doubt her identity and had sneaked into her bedroom at midnight to test her. I leaned lazily on the couch when I noticed someone approaching me from behind. I gave a faint smile. "Why are you here in the middle of the night? Aren't you afraid that your father, the king, will come to know about it?" The man's breath suddenly got heavier. The air seemed to stagnate in the room. Yahir spoke in a cool tone after a long while. "You are Wenna." Shocked, I covered my mouth and laughed. The golden hairpin on my head rustled as my head moved. I turned around to face Yahir. "You're so brash and blunt. That has always been your style." The 3rd prince's pupils contracted, and his eyes darkened. I got up from the couch and slowly walked toward him barefoot, resting my face on his chest. I called out softly, "Yahir." Only Wenna would call him Yahir. Yahir's body stiffened, and he panted heavily. His hands were trembling as he uttered a sentence with much difficulty. "You're not dead." My eyes darkened, and I pushed him away gently. Looking at my fellow official, there was a trace of indescribable charm in my eyes. I grabbed his shirt and breathed lightly into his ear. "It's me. I'm Wenna, the one who was sentenced to death together with my family. I'm not dead. Are you happy to know that?" "Yahir, what are you trying to do?" Yahir shouted. I raised my eyebrows and traced his shirt with my finger. I smiled seductively at him. "What do you think I'm trying to do?" He pursed his lips and grabbed my hand. "You know what I mean." He paused and said in a low voice, "Isn't it enough to kill those who framed you? Why did you kill Mr. Larson? He didn't do anything to you." My expression remained unchanged, but my hand was a little cold. I said calmly, "It was an accident." Yahir looked at me in disbelief. I stretched out a hand and smiled at him. My fair and slender fingers were glowing under the candlelight. "Yahir, do you know that once my hands are stained with blood, I can never go back? At this point, I would rather err on the side of caution. I would rather kill them all than make a mistake." "Wenna, you're crazy." Hearing this, I stared at him gloomily and said, "Yes, I'm crazy." I suddenly pounced on Yahir and caught him off guard. I sat on him, staring at his stunned expression. I ripped off my clothes, revealing a large area of my chest. My skin looked more provocative with those hideous-looking scars. He looked at the bruises on my collarbone, which were a result of being tortured. His pupils suddenly dilated. "You." He stopped talking and did not finish his sentence. I lowered my head and nibbled at his throat. "Do you want to go crazy together with me?" 10J Aiden, who was pressed to the ground by me, was stunned for a moment. He looked at me quietly and swallowed hard. I pretended to be calm and got up from him, trying to keep my confused feelings in check. Addressing the crowd, I said aloud, My performance is over. The script did not mention anything about nibbling his throat or the last line I said. I added them to the scene myself. The scene flashed across my mind. Jaden's eyes were red, and he looked perplexed. He appeared to be surprised and hurt at the same time. There was even a tinge of jealousy. His gaze was about to burn me alive. He had never looked at me so passionately when we were not filming. A terrible feeling came upon me. Did you nip at it the last time? Jaden deliberately lowered his voice as he inched closer to me. I was stunned, but I immediately realized what he was talking about. He was referring to my performance during the audition, when I nipped at his collarbone without flinching at all. I blushed and nodded. Yes. Jaden's eyes suddenly lit up. Then he seemed to think of something again and frowned slightly. After some hesitation, he asked, "You bit me just now. The last time, did you?" I knew what he was going to say. I didn't bite him there, Quaid, and I didn't do anything that night. We were just acting out a scene together. I finished acting out the entire scene for the audition alone. After saying that, I looked up at Jaden and saw the joy in his eyes. He had fallen into a stupor. At that moment, my thoughts were interrupted by a loud voice. Natalie Yates, you are amazing. Jaden's girlfriend stood up from her seat and clapped. I like your performance very much. You're so natural and full of emotion. You are the winner in my book. She was so excited that she sounded incoherent. I turned to look at Jaden in surprise. So his girlfriend was a top scriptwriter from Splendor Corp. She was Suzette Johnston, the author of Bewitching Concubine. According to the grapevine, Suzette came from a wealthy family, and she wrote scripts as a hobby. Suzette always kept a low profile and was a mysterious personality. No reporter had managed to photograph her. I remembered that the internet said that she was 28 years old. While it was common for some actresses to conceal their age, her age really did not match how she looked. Suzette came over and stared at me excitedly for a long time. A trace of determination flashed in her eyes. She then removed the fur coat she was wearing and placed it in my hand. This fur coat has been with me for many years. There is only one piece in the world. I'm giving it to you now. She patted me on the shoulder and said, "Continue to work hard. I think you will have a bright future." As I sensed her sincerity, my heart began to feel heavy. She actually liked my performance. She even gave me her treasured fur coat. I lowered my head and clutched the fur coat tightly as if it weighed a ton. I felt embarrassed and remorseful, thinking of how I had bitten Jaden's throat earlier. Unable to tolerate my own behavior, I suddenly looked up and said in a trembling voice, "Do you have 5 minutes? I have something to tell you." Without waiting for anyone to react, I quickly pulled her into the dressing room. I took a deep breath as I closed the door. "I'm sorry." Suzette looked confused. I lowered my eyes and hugged the fur coat in my arms as if I was mustering all my courage. "I didn't want to tell you this. After all, it's so shameful to sleep with someone else's boyfriend. However, I cannot forgive myself." I continued, "I promise you I won't have anything to do with Jaden in the future." After saying that, I closed my eyes. Although I said it with a huge resolution, my heart still sank. Suzette's expression changed. "You can't do that." This time, I was the one who was stunned. I gave her a puzzled look. She was so magnanimous that I could not believe my ears. Suzette pursed her lips, and a trace of hesitation flashed in her eyes. After a while, she continued, "Forget it. I'll be honest with you. We've already decided on Jaden as the male lead all this while. The contract has already been signed. Your performance in the audition this morning was excellent. We should cast you as the female lead if nothing goes wrong. You'll have a lot of scenes together in the future. We'll be filming for 6 months. How can you not have anything to do with him?" I was stunned. It suddenly dawned upon me that if Jaden was not the male lead for Bewitching Concubine, he would be one of the judges for the audition today. Wait a minute. Suzette seemed to suddenly realize something. "From what you said just now, did you think that Jaden is my boyfriend?" I saw the surprise in her eyes and swallowed unconsciously hard. "Isn't he?" "Of course not," she blurted out. "Didn't you read the news on the internet? I made a public announcement on May 20th. Caleb is my boyfriend."